Hello and welcome to the TrueWorks podcast, the podcast that helps you understand how the gospel transforms your life and your work. I'm your host, Joshua Smith, and with me is my guest, Doug Meikle.
Damn.
Doug, welcome to the show.
I'm like a guest again. How does this even happen?
Well, we've had lunch.
Yes, I suppose so. Yeah. I should call for another edit of that, shouldn't I? Yes.
Yes, you should.
Wish I have editorial control. I really do.
You do, yeah.
Yes.
You are technically my boss, technically.
Yeah. To the extent that anyone is, yeah.
Yes, true. And we're talking about, as
let's
always,
try and get
on
back.
TrueWorks.
Yes, let's try and get back to the point here.
We're talking about work.
Yeah, we are indeed talking about work.
And maybe more focused at work than some of the other podcasts that have been necessary groundwork, theological, biblical, even sometimes cultural groundwork needed to do. But now we're looking at a piece that is closer to us in chronological history. Dorothy Sayers writing right after the Second World War.
Yep.
And just more familiar context she finds herself in and that we share with her. And she's writing too, in her context, this right after the war, of what are we going to work for? After all of this, she's noticing this great, massive unity that comes of pouring into the war effort. And why are people working? People didn't even second guess why they were working. They were working so that they could have victory in the war. And that gave tremendous motivational, organizational power to not only national economies, but international, how they banded together. But then she asked, what are we going to do after the war is finished? What is work going to be for? And that's kind of the impetus of this piece that we have here today. So she goes through some different options that you might think of, that people might have, and I think these are going to be pretty similar if we ask someone on the street of why they work. What is the reason for why they go to work, have a job, an occupation? What are some of those reasons that people might give or that come to mind for you, Doug?
Why do you go to work, Jothia?
My wife says that I can't be a bum.
See, that is one motivation.
Yes,
that's one motivation.
Yeah, and if Mama's not happy,
then
nobody.
You're
happy.
definitely not happy.
Yes.
So you go to work because your wife kicks you out in the morning and says you need to go earn a living.
Yes.
That's good. That's a good primary motivator.
It is. She's very, very motivational.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that would probably get into this sort of make ends meet kind of mode. Because Sayers offers that as a reason why we would go to work, because we've got to do things in the world, we've got to make progress, got to get some resources that we can do, that we can convert into other goods that we enjoy. So that's certainly a reason. And as Joshua was mentioning there, her whole point is that after the war, where we had this great unifying purpose for work, what shall be the purpose of work now that we've taken away that unifying purpose? So it could be, as Joshua does, gets out of bed in the morning to make ends meet. It could be because otherwise we would be bored. That we need to do something.
I hear this from people who retire, who then go and work. Well, why? Well, I can't just sit here.
You can't just sit here, yeah. Well, and then to an extent, I think that's true. I mean, I think that speaks to perhaps something that Sayers kind of speaks to as well, is that because non-Christians certainly, and even Christians, have a view of work that it is a curse. Therefore, it would be good if we stopped it, because clearly that's not a good thing to be cursed all the time. But for the Christian, that's not really, if they think carefully about work, it's not that kind of curse. It will be frustrating and it will be difficult.
Yes.
But that's because of the consequences of the fall and the nature of the world that we live in today. It's not that the work itself is necessarily like that. One can work and one needs to work because, as Sayers says, it's not just an issue of being bored or occupying ourselves. It's something that we must do kind of for our humanity. But if we only have the reason to to go to work that we're just simply it's an occupation, and actually we call it that, of course. It's something that occupies us.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at. I don't know what the etymology of that word
I
is,
don't either.
but it is interesting. Yeah, something to occupy yourself.
Yeah.
Which would be, the very conceptual partner to, because we're bored.
Because we're bored, right.
We don't have anything else. It doesn't have any kind of overarching kind of view of these systems putting together. I mean, she's trying to find something.
Yeah.
All of these industries and individuals and sectors join together for this common effort that's contingent. Right, the war is contingent.
Yeah.
It's
so what
not
are we
going to last.
Exactly? And what is what is the reason why we go to work? Now, the third thing she shares, she mentions, I just really in passing that why do we go to work? To increase shareholder profit. And I think that's one place where actually she doesn't. My own kind of view of that, she doesn't get that quite right, in the sense that increasing shareholder profit is kind of an organizational purpose. It's not and she's really talking about the nature of work almost kind of down at the worker level. Why do I go to work? It's not what. So the organizing principle of an organization could be to increase the profits, that it may return those profits to shareholders. But that can be separate from why do I go to work? Why am I going to work? But eventually she settles on a phrase that I think has been a big help to many of the folks who've gone through this faith and work intensive in the past, and that is that we do the work for the work itself. That the work itself is its own reason for doing it. The worker, as she puts it, serves the work. And I think you mentioned in your notes that that's reminiscent, if you like, of something that we've met earlier in the Faith and Work Intensive. That's Martin Luther, the famous response he had to the Christian shoemaker. How can I be a Christian shoemaker? And he simply says, make good shoes at good prices, or something. That's a paraphrase, but something along those lines. And that's really what Sayers is driving at as well, is that the nature of that work as a shoemaker is good in and of itself. And if one can do it well, that's a great thing for the individual, but also for society overall. Yeah.
And ratchet it up even one step more, it's part of God's good design for that to be individual, society, and even God's created order right in the fabric of things.
Yeah.
There's some phrase, I'm not sure who coined it, but on our website, TrueWorksHouston.org, that work is intrinsic to our dignity. And what we mean by that, of course, is not work so that you will have dignity. No, we already have dignity, and part of the expression of that is our work. And if you take away a man's or a woman's work, then he or she almost questions their dignity. I mean, again, this is, I've heard phrases with friends or family members, of course, reaching retirement, going on the cruise or the vacation, but eventually that gets old. Why? Well, because it's not that you've just kind of disillusioned or convinced yourself over 5 decades that work is part of your nature. It is part of your nature, and if you get away from that, then there's something kind of dehumanizing about the experience.
Yeah. No, and I think Sayers really, that what you mentioned there just at the end there, I think that's the reason why we asked you to read this, and in fact why this short piece is a pretty good challenge for you, is because of exactly that. Is that she recognizes very clearly that this work, that work is part of this sort of the process of being human. The part and parcel of being a human being is to be engaged in forming and shaping the world around you. And when you choose not to do that, that actually seems like rest, but it turns out to be this thing that actually takes away from your humanity. Doesn't add to humanity. More rest and more leisure doesn't necessarily give you more meaning, more purpose, more peace. It's it's the balance of work and leisure, work and rest that ultimately is what you want as a human being.
Yeah, we won't have time today, unfortunately, to look into as the notion of and our posture as a civilization toward work changes, so does our notion of what rest is.
Yeah.
And what leisure is. We most of the time think of rest as simply the absence of work.
Yeah.
Right, inactivity. And the root understanding of leisure is not inactivity, but a certain kind of activity that is contemplative. And so engaging our higher intellectual and spiritual powers. And that would be very consonant with what Sayers is after, because she wants a kind of posture to work, indeed to all of life, that engages the entire human. That is not simply, of course, making ends meet is necessary and good. Increasing shareholder profits are good. But what she wants to do is kind of that motivational piece of what the worker says on a Monday morning of why he should step on or she should step into the office and start the work. It's a service to the work itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's also something we need to very clearly say, I think, though, is that because we have a danger, forgive me, but as a PhD candidate, you have a danger of kind of intellectualizing this process. And I think that that's not what Sayers is after. I think Sayers would... she can write in those terms, no question about that. But what she's looking for in this balance of work and rest, and also the nature of work itself, is something that works whether you truly are that shoemaker or whether you're the writer, as she was. And I think that's pretty important for us to really emphasize to people. Because you were mentioning there in the balance of rest and work. I mean, that rest is there for contemplation and things like that. But rest is also there just simply for taking your kids to a picnic or taking your children to the theater or something like that taking them to a movie. That's true too, right? And it's important that those things are affirmed as well, because if not, we're left with this. Our faith is not purely, it is partly an intellectual exercise, but I think if it remains there, then that's not what we want. And also, it means sometimes that our faith and work intensive is kind of presented as an intellectual exercise, where it's what we're really trying to get through to you is also the sense of practice, of praxis, of your work being part of this rhythm that you have in your life of both work and rest that allows you to flourish, you and your spouse and family or whatever,
So I just have to say, we can edit this out, I guess. So in delighting in a picnic or going to the theater, that is precisely the kind of more ancient view of what leisure is supposed to be, because you're beholding and delighting in what is good and beautiful, right? Yeah. Rather than contrast something like that with binge watching, whatever. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with binge watching, but there is a kind of greater passivity and some sort of something. No, and
that was what I was trying to say. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I just want us to be clear on that.
You don't have to go read poetry and memorize. Wait,
because I thought that's what you PhD philosopher types did.
It's what we aspire to do, but then we have toddlers, so can't do that.
See? That's good. I'm glad you have those toddlers.
I do too.
Another element, though, of the problem that Sayers brings up is one that I think gets a lot of play these days, is the nature of work and what are we working towards and what are we producing? Are we simply producing things to be consumed that have no kind of intrinsic value of themselves? And that her view of that is both anti-human and kind of anti-Christian as well. And so if you're simply, that there is types of work that are less noble, that where the work itself is creating something simply to be consumed and discarded. And that I think from her perspective, she says, you got to find work that's not like that. That will be hard to make intrinsically meaningful because at its heart, it's not.
Yeah, I think that hits closer to home in our own time than it did even in Sayers' time.
Yeah.
I mean, the mid 40s, the late 40s, think of how the nature of the economy has been transformed.
Yeah.
And again, we're painting with pretty broad brush strokes. I mean, we have to, but there is something telling of an economy whose only end is to create consumer products for consumption and to create more consumers.
Yeah, and she, again, this kind of gets back to her point, is that we've just had this existential exercise of our will to overcome in the Second World War. Okay, we've overcome now. Now what? Why did we do that? We're all going to go back to work now. We're going to go back to regular life. We had this unifying purpose in war. So what are we going to do now? And I guess if she was here today, she might say that if what we've done with that great opportunity is to create a society that consumes more than it gives back, then have we really won anything at all? Right? Have we really won anything at all?
Or without war, and we have another reason for work, but have we gained anything in that process? Right? Yeah. I think that's a great question.
Yeah, and she also brings up the fact that the church in all of this doesn't really seem to have a vision of work that helps people out of that consumerist trap and consumptionist trap. And I think she's absolutely clear. She's right on that. Sometimes it's an error of commission, other times it's an error of omission. But in both senses, the church doesn't offer something back to the world and say, look, you can order your life this way, where you just seek to produce and consume, finding no peace in that, or you can try and organize society a different kind of way. And, I'm not pitching there for any political system. I'm just simply illustrating that there are other ways and other goods in the world that perhaps as Christians we need to pursue. But that's what she's trying to say, is that we had the opportunity, or as she, in her context, time-wise, we now have the opportunity to do things because of the nature of what we have just gone through.
Yeah, that there's something of a blank slate that we can build.
We can choose to do something different now.
Yeah, where you can't, once the train and the locomotive is kind of on its way, you can't stop at mid-track, but it had been stopped.
Yeah.
And this kind of dearth of resources of the church equipping its people in order to relate to work differently is the impetus behind TrueWorks. You thinking of this as you started this year?
Yeah, I guess that's true. We started this in some way. I mean, look, what I've really discovered is that you start something for reasons, but then you discover either better or truer reasons as you go forward, right?
Fair enough.
Just kind of, but no, it's things like this. I personally had great bosses in life, and had jobs that I really loved and enjoyed. Apart from 1 year, I had 1 year really pretty tough circumstances. But other than that, work for me was just great. Loved it and loved being part of the community that was with work. But however, I would guess I went through my most, if not all of my working career, never really being confronted by someone like Sayers saying, what are you working for? And I certainly didn't have that in my mind as a 22-year-old trying to earn a living and getting on with life. I mean, if this came at all, it came much later in my career, much later in my life. But that kind of founding story of TrueWorks is finally realizing that this was a place that had given me great meaning, and that the relationships that I'd shared were really really great for me and had done a great stuff for me. And I wanted to help other people discover that in their own life, because I had seen with my own eyes that as especially younger men and women discover that they can have this great purpose in life, or they can discover in their work purpose, that kind of reflected then back on their life, that my life can have purpose. And in that, and the next step of that equation was that they find their purpose in God. They already committed oftentimes by the time they show up to TrueWorks. They know they want to be a Christian. They just don't necessarily know how, or how it can be done, or how it can provide meaning and purpose. this really helps. This is one of the reasons why we felt so attracted to it, is that we've seen close to 100 people go through this program now, and that's one of the themes that come through, is that this enlivens people, because suddenly something that was such a difficulty to many and a burden to many becomes something that where the burden is much lighter, and it gives life rather than takes life.
Yeah. And part of that process of giving life to them individually is because they are getting to participate in the giving of life as they're motivated by other factors than simply, other kind of motives than,
sure,
I got to get this done this week.
Yes. And I think that, so Sayers also is writing in the second half of the 20th century, and which is, pretty close to us, and it's at the end of a 300-400 year process, obviously that but that she has just gone through the war, but the process by which work became meaningless started quite a long time before that. If you were, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker in medieval Europe, you knew what work was for, right? You couldn't misinterpret that, because you were the candlestick maker for your community. You were the baker, you were the miller. You were those things that were an intrinsic part of a community. As work progressed, and especially in the Industrial Revolution, as it was more automated
and more removed from the community that
exactly.
it's benefiting.
Yeah. So the economies of scale that could and scope that could be created by bringing work together. There was a good in that. We have things in the world because of that process. But that process means that the medieval baker, who could see his product all the way through from the manufacturer all the way through to the handing it over to the consumer who purchased it, that he probably already knew, that person doesn't necessarily exist in that great industrial process now. They might see making that bread, they might see selling that bread, they might see growing the wheat that would go to make that bread, but they won't see something that's at this continual process that really connects the worker with the work and also with the consumer of that work. Now, I think that what Sayers is trying to tell us is that process gives us goods, no question about that, but it also has costs that may not be obvious to us. Costs of dislocation and disconnection that we see society paying now that may not have been obvious to us. I mean, I think
in kind of our blind race to be on the tails, or excuse me, the edge of progress, and we didn't she wouldn't say necessarily slow down, but count the cost. And we must provide to our churches and to society this reorientation, because they're just going to be swept away to where the proverbial butcher or baker is not going to see the intrinsic good at connecting with the community. Right?
Or even, so this is a bit off the point, but even the connection to the creation in our food. It's me, I love my Italian butcher guy, and for folks today, they don't sometimes recognize the fact that steaks come from cows. That they come from
Wait, what?
Yes, exactly. So many people like Joshua think steaks come from HEB, but actually there was a cow involved at one point in that process.
Wow.
I know. See,
wow.
Revelation to you. But that's somewhat of a joke, not really a joke, but you get the process there. And when our experience of gathering food is not connected to the thing that actually produces it, we're disconnected from the costs of that. We simply just see the exchange, the economic exchange is that, I give you my $25 and you give me the steak.
Yes, yeah.
We don't see the cow, we don't see the land, we don't see what goes into actually producing that.
Yeah.
And I think that's not mentioned in the Sayers thing, but what it is, it's an illustration of what she's driving at, is that we're creating work. We have now created work in such a way that it provides less and less meaning. And we as churches, unless we put the meaning back into that work, the people that come through our doors are becoming ever more dislocated from their work, but that also means they're becoming dislocated from each other. You know?
And I would just to like to rephrase just slightly something that you said, because I am that PhD student, I guess. The church is not putting the meaning into the work; it's helping them to see the meaning that's already there.
Yeah,
right?
no, you obviously, yes, you are indeed right about that. I mean, in the sense that that's how they're revealing the createdness of it.
And we've kind of lost sight of it.
Yeah. No, I think that. So that's why that's why we do this short reading, and Sayers herself, contemporary of folks like C.S. Lewis, I guess.
Well, they were apparently good friends, and had many met several times, and then had written letters about various topics together.
I mean, she also not the model Christian in her various ups and downs of her life sometimes, but I think in this is a pretty profound work, and maybe some folks just are familiar from her with the kind of genteel murder mysteries that she wrote as well.
Yeah, and I was familiar with her because she has a pretty pivotal piece that motivated the modern classical education movement.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So she and I can't remember the text that it's from, but kind of let's return to the quadrivium and the trivium.
Yeah.
We've lost this, and past centuries, past past generations have benefited from this, and we've gotten away from this because we've gotten too technical.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a piece that I'm familiar with. I wanted to read this quote from. I just thought it was so excellent from the piece, and then we'll turn to wrapping this up. She says, "We should ask of an enterprise not will it pay, but is it good? Of a man, not what does he make, but what is his work worth? Of goods, not can we induce people to buy them, but are they useful things well made? Of employment, not how much a week, but will it exercise my faculties to the utmost?" Now, obviously, these are, she's meaning to be rhetorical here. We have to make ends meet. I think we've made that point evident. But she's wanting to say like that cannot be our only motivating factor. When we get to create something from the ground up, there are circumstances, there are conditions at which you don't get to think of the purpose work. You just got to work in order to eat. But in her context and in many of our context, we get to say, okay, now we get to approach more than one opportunity, and we get to build for something. We get to look at work, peer deeper into it of how it was originally intended to be. Well, what is that? And Sarah gives us work for work's sake. The goods that you are creating, that you are discovering, are intrinsically valuable, and that can be enough, and that should be enough.
Yeah.
But we live in fallenness, right?
Well, but look, I think true, and we're going to we've done a lot of caveating of her desire to make work meaningful, but I still feel that there's something to be said for this. I think. I mean, one of our insights, for example, being that we are creators more profoundly than we are consumers. We are created because we're created by God, and the industrial world that we live in treats us as if we're only consumers, or for the most part that we're consumers. And I think her point is, no, you're if you don't recognize the fact you're a creator and become this thing that's only a consumer, then you're actually dehumanizing yourself. And partly what she's asking there, I mean, we're talking there as if these things, we could be seen to be talking there, or heard to be talking there as if these things were absolutes. But think of it this way, also in relative terms, in that you're doing a great job, you love your job, you love the people that you work with, but you get an offer of a job that pays you 10% more to go work with somebody else. Her point is that if you're in her point would be something along the lines of, if you're in a place where you love your work, it exercises your faculties to the utmost, for example, as she says, right? If you're in that place with good people in a great working situation, trading that for 10% more compensation is most likely a bad trade.
You have a great story about a gentleman, I think that your company tried to persuade several times to move because he was so good at his job. And he had found a context to exercise his faculties to the utmost, and no amount of compensation
there wasn't
offers.
Yeah, I mean, so this was a person that he ran a manufacturing plant. He was very, very good at it, and it was that's a big and complicated thing to do as well. It's not an easy thing to do. So you could see why it would exercise your technical faculties for sure, but also your business and your management of people. There's lots of great things about that job, and obviously in the last role that I had, we had 6 or 8 major manufacturing sites, 3 or 4 in the United States and 3 or 4 in Italy, and wanted to get this guy into headquarters so he could have supervision over all of those, not have one plant, but have all of them.
Wow.
And he said, nope, I'm totally happy where I am. And he was happy where he is because he loved his job. He loved the people he worked with. His kids were in a great situation, and he wasn't going to be trading that set of goods and that role for something that would exercise him in a completely different way. Mm-hmm. And also, in fact, what is it they say in jobs? That supervisors, they get promoted to their level of incompetence, and I think what that means
is. Were you a supervisor?
I was. Yeah. I was definitely promoted to that point. What I think is meant by that sometimes is that all the things that make you good at doing job A, that does not necessarily make you good at supervising said job.
Yeah.
So, and I think that. Yeah. I think Sayers would recognize that stuff in the sense that there are skill sets that one is given that allow you to exercise your faculties to the utmost. That's the job that you want. Mm-hmm. You don't want the next job that ultimately either makes you miserable if you can do it, or you can't do it and you get fired. And if you're in the United States or other places, that's not a trade-off that you really want to make. So we've gone in this short piece by Sayers from what is the true nature of work to also kind of how you should trade the goods that you have in a good position and good work versus, the next job that may give you more money but less of those other good things. But there's lots in this little piece. Very insightful.
It is. It's. I was reminded of something similar when you said the skills that make you good at job A as you're promoted may not make you good for job B. This is a growing pain for startups where you have a tiny team as a startup and you may flourish with 5 to 10 people. If you do that well, then you're going to be successful. And then all of a sudden you have 50 people, 100 people, and that takes a different set of skills.
Sure.
You have to delegate and delegate to delegate. And that's, you have to trust your business, the people that you hire and so on and so forth. And that's a hard transition for some people.
That is a hard transition to make. And it's a transition that's in every role and every level.
Yeah.
Well, and people get to their level, at some point, there are people in the world who really know how to handle a really big job with thousands of people, and maybe even tens of thousands of people. That's certainly one set of skills. But then managing a team of 10 or 20 people is just a totally different animal. Mm-hmm. And even the things that allows you to feel really good and in control of that one job, you quickly realize you're never going to get that level of control or that level of certainty. Again, you're going to have to trust other people around you as you kind of get more senior. So I think, that's a long way from good old Dorothy Sayers here. But
at least what she explicitly says, but certainly in the spirit of what she says.
Yeah.
And if we could expand kind of our exposure beyond this one text, that would be, she explicitly talks about that community and trust.
Yeah, sure.
So
and Sayers is this. well, she's an interesting character in and of itself. So I'll let you guys go do the Wikipedia search, etc. But there's a lot in her life as she goes through it that makes her a pretty interesting character.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this interesting discussion about seeing work for its own sake and working for the good of work in itself. This is the TrueWorks podcast, where we've looked at this and other issues on our other episodes. If you want to find those episodes, you can find us on all podcasting platforms or on our website at trueworkshouston.org. Thank you so much.